We're here. We made it. Today's show, we have two special guests with us. That's right, audience. You heard it here first. Two special guests. Hussainatu Blake and Hassanatu Blake. Yes, there's resemblance, not only in name, but in familiarity of presence. For those that are listening, perhaps on Spotify or Apple or Google, we're talking with sisters today. Both professions of experts, certainly that are worthy of joining us today. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Chris, for having us.
We're so very happy to have you with us today. Let's chop wood. Today we find ourselves in North America with a pandemic that still presides. The theater of work has changed dramatically within the last 18, just now going on 19 months. How are we going about doing work horizontally? Every industry in the work sphere has been impacted. From your lens perspective and your observation of transition and change, what have you seen these past 18 months in the theater of work?
I think I've seen a lot. And I think because I'm coming from an education technology perspective and also from a public health perspective, I've seen a lot. These two sectors have experienced drastic changes because of the pandemic. In the public health space, as you know, people have had to access health care in a very different manner than they're used to. Telehealth has skyrocketed. And also many conditions have gotten worse because people haven't seen their physicians or they are not necessarily familiar with telehealth. In the education space, there has been a lot of changes in how we learn, transitioning from a physical space to an online space, a remote space, and now trying to kind of have or create a hybrid space now in learning. But with that said, I think in both sectors, like in many different sectors, what I see is a opportunity, right, to reshape, reimagine the way in which we live, right, the way in which we learn, the way in which we deliver services, and the way in which we see our health and how we interconnect and engage with people. So while the last 18 months or almost 2 years really have been very hard in a lot of ways, it's also been very, I wouldn't say exciting, but a great opportunity for us in general to start to think more differently and more innovatively about how we want to move forward.
I would also like to add that in the past 18 months, we have learned that things that we have deemed as luxuries or nice to have are actually necessities now, right? So access to basic Wi-Fi has become a necessity, not only for countries like the United States, but other countries that don't have the same resources as the United States, right? It has become a necessity. I also want to add from a perspective of a parent. and a perspective of someone who lives and works in the US, but also has lived and worked in many other countries. As Americans, we are now valuing our, not, I wouldn't say our health, work-life balance, but we really are prioritizing the way in which we find happiness with our everyday jobs, right? It's not enough just to go to work and make money and come back home. We need to be fulfilled, and aspects of public health are now incorporating mental health, right, in everyday talk, whether it be with adults or with our children. Mental health is such a big part of our everyday lives. And it has been incorporated specifically when it comes to educating and making a child or growing a child into a responsible full adult.
No doubt. And for the audience listening to us, we're joined by Hussainatu and Hassanatu Blake. We're having a discussion on the stated condition of where we find ourselves contemporary at our time, with sentiments that have already been raised in this discussion of a transition in which we're not going back. We talk about, as Hassanatu brought to our attention, the meteoric rise of healthcare and telemedicine, which has hit the stratosphere in billions of dollars. Unlike anything we've ever seen in the medical sector globally. The use of telepresence, thus becoming more virtual in the past 18 months than we have the past 10, many things have changed. And to Hussainatu's point, Hussainatu has said the necessities, or what may be considered fringe, have now converted to the necessities. And these necessities have been identified even into the halls of DC with such as the minimal need, the prevalent need for broadband and for access. For us to hold such discussions, do transactions into the cloud, into the theater, we're going to touch on many of these subjects that have been raised. But first I must ask, who are the Blakes?
Good question. I think first and foremost, when people see us when we are together, they will know that we're twins. We are Cameroon American twins. We are Cameroon American women who are very passionate about people, very passionate about helping people and connecting people. I think what stands out about us when you get to know us is that we are very dedicated to being connectors and facilitating connections between people, because we want to see better for all of us, right? So I think in a nutshell that explains us, even though we have many different subsects of our personalities and of the work that we do. As I mentioned earlier, I work in global health, have been for almost now 20 years. And then also, along with my twin sister, we've been in the ed tech space for 12 years. So all of our work has been connected with the intent of connecting and educating people so that they can, have a better life or learn better or just be better in general.
And I also want to add that, we're not just connectors of people, we are connectors of ideas and resources. Because oftentimes, you can be linked to someone, but why are you being linked to them, right? Just to know them? Or are you being linked to them to create something greater for your community? And are you being linked to them because they have access to certain things that you don't have access to and that you would gain from, or you may have something to offer them? We are people that we strongly believe in education in all aspects of anyone's life, and connecting people to ways in which they can educate themselves to make an impact on their communities is what we're all about.
Let's talk about education. We've seen over these past 18 months the deconstruction of the educational system and the communication apparatus. We've seen the negotiations to navigate new ways into communities and neighborhoods for children, young adults, and adults to be connected to their curriculum and to their classrooms. I really love what was just expressed about this work-life balance revelation. That right now, as we yet sit here, there's the great quit happening right now. And people whose lives have been gained again were those that are now saying with this calls that it's time to come back. I'm not ready to give my 14, 16-hour work of commute back again. Once someone's had a taste of that rest, it seems to me that they're not going back. In similar ways, might the same be said of education? My question that I have for the both of you, squarely, what is ed tech and what's its prevalency today?
I would say ed tech now is totally different than what ed tech was 2 years ago. Okay. In 2019, ed tech was seen as optional to most people, or what are you talking about to others? Okay. Ed tech today, I believe, is an all out necessity. Okay. School systems need it, companies need it, nonprofits need it. Ed tech is in all aspects of our lives, whether we are training our employees, okay, whether we are educating our students, whether we are providing opportunities to people who wouldn't otherwise have them. Ed tech is now a necessity. And I just remember in 2019 having to explain to people what space I was in, what I actually did. Now people are like, oh yeah, I know. Mm-hmm. They have some type of reference because 2020 made it a part of everyone's life, whether they liked it or not, whether they understood it or not. It was definitely in your face.
Just to add to that, I think ed tech is, in a nutshell, a new learning system, like a new way of learning. It's education the way you want it. It's education with flexibility and personalization. That's what ed tech is today. And I think it's ever evolving, right? The way we learn, we've learned, especially through this pandemic, is that we all need and require different things in how we process and gain knowledge and information. So we need technology to facilitate that. And we need accessible and affordable technology to access what we need and that type of content that we need. I think, and I had mentioned this in another conference, that what we will see in the next few years is, one, a ramp up of how we access educational content online. And also, we will also see the need for quality content, vetting and making sure that we have really good and reliable resources that provide reliable content and knowledge. We've seen it in this pandemic where there's a lot of miseducation, a lot of miscommunication, because there isn't really any vetting system in place to let us know what's good content, what's real content, and what's necessary content. And I think that we'll see a difference in that as ed tech in general starts to expand and grow.
Permit me to deliver two questions. Hassanatu, you're touching on accessibility. The question that prevails in my mind is, what is the urgency right now? Because we know that the urgency bell is ringing and has been for some time. But in horizontally, the space of education, where is the most attention needed? And the second question, Hussainatu, we talked about the giant case study that everyone had to participate in of becoming virtual. And coming from the other side of it, we've come to find out that it works. Great companies and corporations have given up leases. Some have declared you never have to come back. Yet there was still, and I want to say more than a remnant, and beyond the gig economy, there were those workers that have been working virtual before the pandemic began. Zoom and Hangouts and other platforms did not arise March 2020. And now, and when you speak to a sentiment that has become normalized, if you will, us identifying that we're no longer subjected to location bias. How far are we running with that today in this new hybrid work remote world? Please, at your leisure.
Wow, I think that great questions. To your first question, I think the focus right now and in the nearest future is going to be on engagement. How do we engage in a way that is meaningful for everyone? A lot of people are tired of the Zoom, right? The Zoom meetings, while they are convenient, while they have been a Band-Aid in a lot of ways for us, it's also been a conduit to a new way of learning. And we need to use that as a way to kind of now sit and really learn what makes for proper engagement online. And there's a lot of different ways in doing that. As I said earlier, there is going to be focus on content and the quality of content in EdTech. And then also, I think we are already starting to see it now, privacy and safety issues online, which is going to be a growing concern as we move forward, especially when you're talking about EdTech and even health tech, because people want to feel safe and they want to also feel that their information, their personal information, is safe online as well.
I want to add two things. You spoke about accessibility. Access has always been an issue when it came to EdTech. I think that with companies like Verizon and AT&T, at least in the US, focusing and having aspects of their company, at least the public sector departments, really focusing on providing low cost Wi-Fi to communities that need it and don't have it. The accessibility aspect for some people is getting better. But you still run into issues, especially on an international level. Can certain apps be used? Are they blocked off? Can certain devices be used on certain platforms and with certain platforms? So accessibility is not just Wi-Fi, right? It's everything that comes with the connectivity part of EdTech. And also not just the Wi-Fi, the access to the Wi-Fi. We're talking about, like Asa said, access to quality education. Because even with the children who have access to a computer, access to Wi-Fi, are they getting the educational resources? Do they have access to the educational resources that other students in similar situations, but in higher income status brackets have? And you see that when we're talking about public schools that are overcrowded and they have to teach students, 30 students in a class at one time online, as opposed to if you're going to a private school or to a smaller school where you're only teaching 8 students online. So access and equity will always be an issue, and access to the internet, to Wi-Fi, will not be the only issue that we look at. We're really gonna have to get down to the nitty gritty, and you will see the same issues that we have been addressing before the quote unquote need for ed tech is still gonna plague us in this new ed tech era, right?
I think what would be a good way to start addressing those things is starting to focus on where people are. And most people globally are on their phones. Most people globally are accessing internet by phone. So if we can make sure that the content is available and of quality and accessible via your mobile, if the platforms are user-friendly on a mobile, that is going to be crucial. And that is going to be a game changer, not only for people here in the United States, but people globally. In certain countries, they are already starting to do that, right? They're already starting to leapfrog some of the stuff that we are seeing here because they're going to what they already know and what they already have. And they're making sure that they're creating things that work with what they already have. And I think that that can definitely start to bridge the gap, this kind of digital divide that you always hear about, particularly in underserved communities or communities of color.
And then also, and I think Asa raises a great point. You're seeing certain countries leapfrog, and you're going to see certain regions leapfrog. Telecommunication companies in certain regions of the world will have much more greater importance than they've had before. So companies that we may not have heard of, like Safaricom in Eastern Africa, may start to play a much more major role not only in Eastern Africa, but throughout the continent, right? Because their needs and their services are going to be, in demand, not only in their particular region, but continental.
Let's look at the differentiator, shall we? We talk about accessibility, and now we've learned that it's more than what we commonly refer to accessibility as in the points. But there's been some solution that's been provided as well. I'm fascinated by the connectivity of cellular. Let's look at K through 12. Perhaps break it down between K through 8 and college. Are the same conditions across the board affecting all? And if not, what is affecting our college on the collegiate level students versus our K through 12 students? What is the difference? An audience, we hear this, but I think it's relevant to discern that when we talk about education, who exactly are we referring to and what bodies of cohorts? Please share.
I think that the common denominator, regardless of if it's K through 5 or 6 through 8 or 9 through 12 or college or even adult learning, is the mental health aspect of remote learning. We have seen that while remote learning is great, it can cause isolation. So that is a common denominator. And when we're talking about mental health, especially when we're talking about K through 5, that is a little worrisome because the way most younger children learn is through social interaction, right? So remote learning in that regard can be problematic if it does not have a hybrid approach, okay? Meaning that finding a way to incorporate educational resources, whether it be via technology or in person, into the everyday curriculum of socializing young people.
I think that's crucial. The way in which we learn from K to 5 is different than from 6th through 8th grade, and different when you're in high school and in college. So, especially in ed tech, we have to make sure that we are creating solutions for each segment of learning. While remote learning has been transformational for universities, for adult learning, and even high school students, it has been somewhat of a nightmare for students who are between the ages of, say, 3 and 13. Because, like Usa had mentioned earlier, when you're in between those ages, you learn not just by didactic sessions, you also learn mainly by interacting with people. You learn how to share when you're at school, playing in the playground, right? And when you don't have that, it becomes very, very hard and frustrating for children of that age to learn and to even pay attention online. And we've seen this through the past several months with remote learning. And it's going to be our responsibility as educators, as parents, as people in the education space, as particularly people in the ed tech space, to come up with solutions that incorporate hybrid learning and ed tech together, right? So that we are able to deliver education in a safe way, but we're also catering to the ways in which children learn. And that is through human connection, honestly, simply put.
Permit me to paint a scenario. We're going to talk virtual reality. K through 12, college level. We've had a solution that's been provided to us today in reference to everyone has the majority of access to a mobile phone. These mobile phones are connected to either Wi-Fi or cellular. And for the audience listening, we're going to delve into virtual reality. And when we talk about virtual reality, it goes a step beyond Zoom. Over the last 18 months and towards the later days of these 18 months, report after report has been coming out about the notorious Zoom fatigue. How unhealthy it is, even for us in the corporate arena and for those that are either public or private sector. With too long of a time just staring and looking at people, day in and day out. The promise of virtuality, in part, is that it gives us virtual immersive environments. It gives us greater spans. It gives us greater room for creativity. It allows us to stretch our legs, if you will. And it segues into greater cognition with the promise for greater and expansive environmental fidelity. Now, as it was just expressed, the need for human connectivity. But my question is, based on this scenario, in what manifestation does that connectivity need to be? We have shifted dramatically in the way that we communicate. And I would submit that the greatest achievement in technological use case, at least within the last 10 years, is undoubtedly communication itself. The tools that are able for us to be able to connect with one another, to train for a surgeon to teleport herself onto a Stanford campus in the surgical theater to be able to perform surgery with the robot Da Vinci machine. The spans in which we're looking at when we talk about virtual reality, we know that it's not appropriate for all ages. Our youth and our children, K through 8 in particular, they're too young to have a headset. A headset audience, HMD, commonly referred to, or a head-mounted display, to have on their head, let alone their eyes. Studies suggest that ocular development in their formative years have not taken shape yet, and that it's a dangerous and a hazard. It's a choose-your-own adventure. I'll never put a HMD on the headset of a child. Where does that leave us? Well, for those that can have an HMD, supply chain disruption has happened globally. So would they even be able to access it with only 60 million HMDs deployed? And I can't even say worldwide. There's still so many different countries that are without common supply. And if they do have an opportunity to find themselves with access to a headset of what may cost $300 for Oculus Quest, I'm told in Mumbai it can run in excess of $1,000 plus. So is it truly accessible? With that said, in this scenario painted, because I feel like we're chopping significant wood, from your lens, as we talk about ed tech, meaning technology and the exploration therein, where does virtual reality have us play in this discussion?
I believe virtual reality picks up where Zoom leaves off. And it does it in a way where it encourages engagement for those who are able to access it and who are old enough to experience it, right? Virtual reality really plays on how humans generally learn the most, and that's by doing. So it stresses simulation activities and just experience, which is great. But to your point, it hasn't been accessible. And virtual reality is not necessarily a new technology. It's new to ed tech, but it's not new, right? We've been in this space. A lot of people experience it through gaming, but it's new to education and educational technology, which can help to better engage students once it's accessible. And I think there are many different ways to access it now without using a headset. There are a lot of tools now that you can access web-based. You don't have to have, a headset. You don't even need to like turn your phone a different way. You can just plug in, sign in, and experience it to a certain degree. We need more of that. And we need to be able to expand and grow from that as well in order to make it more accessible globally. In addition to that, while virtual education and virtual learning is, I think, the next step for ed tech, it still needs to find a way to incorporate itself into the hybrid learning that I think needs to be at the center of what ed tech is all about.
I also want to add that virtual reality can be a major game changer, especially in the ed tech field, when we are talking about providing resources for people who have disabilities. Oftentimes, there is this assumption when we are talking about ed tech, we're talking about students who can see and hear, right? Because that is how most people communicate. The beautiful thing about virtual reality is that it can provide people who don't necessarily have those sensory capabilities the ability to also participate in the arena that everyone else is participating in. Okay. And we're seeing that when we're talking about technology that is, dealing with smell, that's giving people an experience beyond the typical I see you and I hear you. So I think that virtual reality and ed tech will be a game changer. And I think that you will see it really try to, I wouldn't say level the playing field, but definitely improve the playing field for people who don't have, who have disabilities or certain impairments that inhibit them from doing the typical everyday things.
For all our educators that are listening, why do they come to you?
I think that's a really good question. And I think they come to us because with all the work that we've been able to do over the past 12 years, we have done it as a twin initiative with a dual perspective. We present things in two ways, in two viewpoints that helps people understand, access, and also collaborate in a more holistic way. You get my perspective, you get USA's perspective. You get the perspective of educators and technologists. You get a perspective from a domestic lens and from an international lens. You get a perspective from an American standpoint and also from an African standpoint. You get it from various different viewpoints. And I think that that's very important, especially when we start to think about what education should look like. And I think that that's what attracts people to come to us to find the latest resources, events, influencers that can help them make decisions on their learning and their children's learning, their families' learning process.
I also want to add that we have a perspective, and we can see so many different sides to things because we've actually lived it. When we talk about ed tech, I'm a professor. I teach virtually. We are, and we're operators of an ed tech nonprofit that conducted ed tech projects, not only domestically, but internationally. We are people who have worked for the public sector in ed tech as well as the private sector in ed tech. We have a holistic view of what it means to be in this space, not only for educators and operators, but also as students. So we can give people a perspective in this space because we have been in so many seats in this space, okay? And that provides people with a sense of, okay, I know that you get where I'm coming from and you can see where I'm coming from because you have lived it. We are relatable and people can trust things that they can relate to and people who they can relate to.
Let me ask you, and I'm asking Hussainatu with a sense of now that we're here, meaning virtual, use case, application, and education. Is it appropriate to suggest that every public and private school and every university, community college, should have a virtual counterpart or campus available so that we might find ourselves on the other side of perhaps a new variant or some type of natural disaster that happens occurring yearly, that will have a place of familiarity to ingress into? Is that reasonable to think that that could be a new standard globally?
It's not only reasonable, it's necessary. If you do not have that type of plan incorporated into your school, your university, your community college, you are doing yourself a disservice and you're behind the ball and you're not providing the resources and the tools that your students and your professors absolutely need. At this point, it's not if, it's when. We know that. We know there will be another virus out there that will cause a pandemic or an endemic. And we have been living through this for almost 2 years now. So this is the best preparation. And you also see it now at universities worldwide, where they're looking for people who are experts in global ed tech or education management. You see roles where they're saying, oh, we need a regional CEO or dean for our virtual campus in DC, but they're based in Boston. You're seeing, oh, we need a virtual or an assistant vice president for student affairs. But in the description, it really is talking about what you were mentioning, like a global campus, online campus. And we're talking about universities in the Middle East, okay? This is not something that is hypothetical. It's happening, and it's happening now, and as it should be.
With that said, and I certainly am on, and I join you on the same page of the necessity for every single public, private, university, and community college school, not just in North America, but in the world, to have a digital counterpart to where they ingress into due to emergency. But let's look at the white elephant in the room, shall we? Public school, public dollars, federal involvement, the bureaucracy. Our teachers are underpaid. They're underserved. Our students, widely, are underserved. County to county, state to state, we see poverty, and there's a great big division in this country, not to mention all the other countries that we're so fiercely unaware of, their stated condition. How do we address this change in the slow moving wheels of public education?
I think you have to first deal with the dollars, right? Technology, initially, the way ed tech was seen by some was that it was a space that could help people and school systems that didn't necessarily have the dollars that certain other school systems did or certain schools had. And it kind of evened out, or at least allowed for accessibility at a low cost, right? We need to get back to that. There is a reason why companies are saying, hey, you know, we're going fully remote, because there is a cost element there. It's not like, oh, we are worried about your commute. That's secondary. The first is because it's cheaper not to rent out a building to put people in, right? That's off their cost sheet. So we need to really emphasize the affordability when it comes to ed tech and ed tech resources, especially when we are talking about how we can incorporate it into public university systems, and most importantly, public schools, K through 12. That needs to be emphasized. And it can be, because if we are doing this in countries that have nowhere near as much money as the United States, then it can be done here in the United States.
I think, just to add to the affordability, it needs to be affordability and quality. A lot of times here in the United States, when people think of public schools, they don't necessarily think of quality education. They think of private schools. They think of sometimes charter schools, but they never consider public education as quality education. So the ed tech that can be affordable and should be implemented should be of quality too, right? because that can help not only with costs, but also that will help with the type of education that is a security not only for the learner, but also for the teacher. The teacher feels more comfortable in teaching and sharing this information because they know it's of quality. And ultimately, in the long run, if you have quality tools, long-lasting, sustainable tools, quality content, quality education, that's a cost saving in the long run. And also a revenue generator, because essentially these students, these learners will eventually have the education that they need, be innovative thinkers, progressive thinkers to create better solutions, better jobs, more opportunities for future workforce.
Are there enough summits, events, discussions happening around what we are discussing with common practical solutions provided, exercised, in a drive, in a social drive geared towards real impact? Are you seeing enough of this? Is there enough happening?
I think there are enough, but the voices that are at the table, that are at the summits, that are invited to these types of summits, aren't sufficient. You can have conferences all day long about this issue, but if you only have certain types of people and communities aren't represented, teachers aren't represented, companies that are actually doing the work aren't represented, it's not going to make a difference how many is out there. We need people in this space, whether you're an educator, an operator, a student, to really come together and discuss what's really going on. Not what you think should happen, not, what certain people want to highlight, but what's really going on in so many different types of communities. And one thing about the EdTech space, and I would be remiss not to mention this, it does not reflect the people who are most greatly impacted by not having access to EdTech solutions. Those are the people who are speaking at these conferences. And that's not, it should be reflective of the people who want to use them, but most importantly, the people who need it and don't have it.
Our underserved communities, undoubtedly the most impacted, Black and brown, at least in North America, from everything that we're seeing. I make a plea to anyone that's listening today to contact Hussainatu Blake for those that are not in that sector of qualification of color and underserved. I beseech you to contact them to gain a better sense of what's already being done and given their history and navigation of what they do. I'm switching subjects for the moment because I think it's appropriate to ask, what is it to be a woman in work today and a person of color?
I'm going to answer this the way I typically answer when people say, how does it feel to be a twin? And what I usually say is, I don't know any other way of being. I only know how to be a twin. I don't know how what life is as a singleton, right? Just like I don't know any other way of being in this world than being a woman, than being a Black woman, than being a Cameroon American woman. So my perspective is, it is a great time to be a Black person, whether you're a woman or a man, in this space. This is the time, more than any other time in the past, this is the time to disrupt and share and create solutions that address our needs. People need to keep in mind that beyond the United States, people of color are the majority. So we need to create solutions that not only speaks to the majority here in this country, but also to the majority of the world. And this is a great time than ever, with the most access that we would ever have to resources, to one another globally, to connect, create, and implement. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for approval. Get together, connect with people who are willing and ready to do the work, and do it. Because you never know if those solutions will be the very solutions that changes the course of education, changes the course of ed tech, and changes the way in which we learn in general.
I also have to add, because I want to give people context of why we see things, especially with that answer, the way we do. We started in the ed tech space at 26 years old, okay? And we were young, we were Black, and we were female. And the way we were able to navigate this space was, one, we were always willing to learn. And so we asked a lot of questions and we asked for help. Two, there were people there willing to open the door, and oftentimes they did not look like us. They weren't young, they weren't Black, and they weren't female. And three, we understood that our perspective is needed. And I think oftentimes that, you know, being a Black female on a global stage, I'm not just talking about domestically, we tend to second guess ourselves. But we need to understand that it's not on us to change our perspective. It's on other people, and eventually they will catch up. But we can't, you know, devalue our experience, our perspective, because other people don't yet understand it. And that's not just for ed tech, that's for any sector, period. It is easy, and we all know the challenges that women go through regardless of race and socioeconomic class. We know the challenges that Black people globally go through, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic class, or even what country you were born in, and certain privileges that you have depending on which country you're in. And so I don't need to riddle those off, but it's really understanding our perspective is needed. And oftentimes when we value that more than we value that validation from other people, we become change makers. You see, just recently, there was a story out about a young man, a young African man, that developed something that is going to be very crucial in ed tech. when it comes to being able to put an earpiece in your ear that translates 40 different languages. That's amazing. And that is from an African, I think, was he Nigerian or Ghanaian?
Ghanaian.
Ghanaian young man. This is someone who is making huge impact in the tech field, but also in the educational field. And he does not have, access to the resources that I know many may have in this country. And I choose to believe that it's because he has valued his perspective, regardless of the validation that he may or may not receive from the powers that be.
Powerful. I'm resisting the urge to burn the midnight oil with the both of you. I'm reserving for one question that we have left with this episode, with the real hope for your return. To our audience listening, to everything that's been discussed and shared, we've barely scratched the surface. My final question for you tonight is, what's the most important thing that we should know about what you do?
I think the most important thing is that right now, we've done a lot in the edtech space, but right now we are really focused on our educational technology consulting media firm called Twinfold. We have a web series that's called Twinfold with Asa and Usa. And it is all things edtech. So if you are just learning about edtech, if you want to know what's out there, what you should know about, come to our web series. We interview innovators. We highlight events you need to know. We highlight tools and resources that can assist you and your family with your learning needs. And we can be reached on major platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you can just type in Twinfold Media or Twinfold with Asa and Usa, and we should pop right on up.
I think, I also want people to understand that Twinfold and the web series not only highlights, the innovators in the edtech space, but also, how edtech impacts everyday lives, right? Where does edtech fit into the music scene or the entertainment scene? But also, how does it fit into, you're just everyday, oh, my kid is here and they're bored. What tools can they use? We make it relatable. We break it down in a way where it is not something that is so hard to understand, right? It's not something that is, abstract. It's something that's relatable, and people can see people like them in that space. So please visit our website. It's Twinfold with Asa and Usa.
Asa, Usa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate this conversation. You know that we admire you and what you do. So we always thank you for allowing us to share your platform with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
It's certainly my pleasure to have you as our honored guest. To our audience listening, you've just now heard from Hassanatu Blake, Hussainatu Blake, two explorers on the pioneer path, two edtech professionals, sisters. Get to know them, And we hope that you all are keeping well. We look forward to you chopping wood with us again. Be safe, keep well, and good night.